All right, good afternoon, folks. I'm KHOU 11 meteorologist Tim Pandagius here with a new update for you. We got a fresh advisory from the National Hurricane Center at 1 p.m., 2 p.m. Eastern, and it shows a intensifying, and the argument could be made rapidly intensifying Ida, now a Category 2 hurricane with sustained winds of 100 miles per hour, a pretty significant jump from the previous advisory that had it sustained at 85 as a Category 1, although a high-end Category 1. The pressure deepening as well. Now, it has developed since we last talked a clearly visible eye, and I'm going to show it to you on satellite imagery, and it is extensive and is just a symbol or signifies that it is a rapidly intensifying tropical cyclone heading through the Gulf of Mexico, and intensification will continue, possibly even rapidly. And what is rapid intensification? Well, let's look back at the last 24 hours of advisories from the National Hurricane Center. We'll start yesterday afternoon at 1 p.m. and go right up to the current advisory. So far, we've seen a pressure drop of 11 millibars and an increase in maximum sustained winds of 25 miles per hour, 75 to 100. Do you see the correlation with the drop in pressures and the rise in sustained winds? That will continue as the pressure bombs out. Some models have it going ridiculously low into like the 950 millibar range. Some are even lower than that. And that would mean winds much, much stronger than that as we go forward. Now, here, according to the rapid intensification definition, an increase in maximum sustained winds of 30 knots or 34 miles per hour in 24 hours has not occurred. Now, we already had a period of rapid intensification yesterday. It did increase 35 miles per hour in 24 hours worth of time. And we will likely see this verified today because it's not done intensifying yet. It's got over 24 hours left in the warm, very conducive environment of the Gulf of Mexico. We've got sea surface temperatures there that are like in the upper 80s to near 90. All right, here's how it looks on satellite imagery with the latest stats from the Hurricane Center. A drop in pressure, we're down to 976 millibars now with sustained winds of 100. Likely gusts within this right near the core, 120 easy over the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Here's the track. We're still going off the track previous advisory because we're getting an intermediate advisory now. A full update comes at 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. this evening on the eastern side. That will give us an adjustment to the cone if necessary. I will tell you, computer models have really not been straying far from their consensus over the last couple of days, looking like a landfall there in southeastern New Orleans or southeastern Louisiana as we get into tomorrow afternoon. Now, they do vary, the models, at least the global models, on the exact timing of that landfall. Some are slower, meaning longer time over the Gulf of Mexico could be a stronger storm upon making landfall. So just for your information here, the Tropical Cyclone Advisory schedule, we're going on Central Time here. If you're in the east, of course, it's an hour, add an hour to that. 4 p.m. is our next full update. We'll get the watches and warnings, storm details, the location, and that all-important cone of uncertainty, any shifts in that. Now, I will tell you, as we get up closer to landfall, we'll likely see that wobble a little bit. Landfall could be a little bit farther to the east, could be a little bit farther to the west, but likely still honing in on southeastern Louisiana as we get into tomorrow afternoon. All right, so here's the bigger picture, 100-mile-per-hour winds. Check out the infrared satellite imagery here. We've talked about why we use this imagery. It tells us the temperatures of the cloud tops. That's important. The colder the cloud tops, the higher they are in the sky, and that means that they're much stronger. The convection is stronger. So when we see shades of black and white showing up here that are completely wrapping around that center, those are extremely strong convective updrafts, okay? Rising air is rapidly occurring, and it is circling around and circling the center of rotation there. 100-mile-per-hour winds does put it at a Cat 2. You can see the Saffir-Simpson wind scale there. We're up to 96 to 110. And unfortunately, we do look like we're going to make our way up to Cat 3 at least, which would mean a major hurricane, and maybe even a Cat 4. Can't be out of the realm of possibility that we get even higher than that and approach Category 5 status. So we got to take this one seriously. 100-mile-per-hour winds right now, still moving to the northwest at 16. Check out a zoomed-in look. That is the eye I was talking about, kind of showing up here on the infrared imagery. We've got very complex and very intense thunderstorm activity wrapping around that center. Of course, this eye wall is where you're going to find the strongest of the winds, too. So when it says 100-mile-per-hour sustained, you're going to find them here, particularly in the northeast quadrant, because you factor in the storm movement as well as the winds, and you get stronger wind gusts there. So keep that in mind. I'm going to go over the quadrants in a second as well. And briefly, I want to show you what it looks like on visible satellite imagery, because this is the high definition GOES 16 satellite, pretty much sitting right on top. And you can see the eye there for a time clearing out. And if we were literally looking down, you could see the ocean through there. It completely clears out. Winds go calm in the eye of a hurricane. It's just on the outside there that you get the strongest of the wind gusts in that eye wall. And that's where we're seeing 100-mile-an-hour winds. We'll see likely much stronger winds as this continues to intensify. But at times when this makes landfall, if it's that strong and it has a cleared out eye, a lot of times it gives people the false sense of security that the storm is over. The sun comes out sometimes. You can see blue sky, birds are flying, winds go calm, and then the back end of the eye wall moves through, winds shift direction, and it's just as bad. So that's a very interesting characteristic of a tropical cyclone with a cleared out warming eye. Let's look at the models now, both the global, the GFS and the European. I showed you this earlier, but there are some slight differences now with a new run of the GFS coming on in. The GFS is in the yellow, the red is the European. The lines, if you're wondering what they are, those are isobars, lines of equal pressure. The tighter they are compacted, the tighter the gradient, stronger the storm, stronger the winds. Both models have an extremely intense cyclone over the Gulf of Mexico, building in the same direction. They're pretty good alignment here for the next 12 hours or so. Then we start to see some divergence here. Now, the European hangs back a little bit by the time we get to tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., still well south of the southeastern Louisiana coastline. The GFS climbs a little bit faster inland, making landfall earlier. This scenario with the European, you can see they're so tightly clustered that it's almost a solid red color around it. So a very intense hurricane at that point. Here we are about 8 p.m. Sunday evening. GFS has Ida well inland by this point. European actually kind of jogs it westwards along the coast, meaning the strongest winds are just raking along the coast for a longer duration of time before it finally brings it inland as well. Not a good scenario with either model, but the European slightly worse off there because you're getting that onshore flow for a longer period of time. By 4 a.m. Monday morning, both models inland, and once they're over land, the frictional component gets factored in. It slows down the wind speed, but we're still going to be looking at a ton of rainfall, like 6 to 12 inches, locally higher amounts there. So the maximizing factors that are in play here that are going to allow Ida to continue to intensify and all likelihood rapidly is all of the variables in play are favorable for it to do so. Sea surface temperatures are well into the 80s. That's not an issue at all. Fuel is not a problem, and those warm waters extend down through a depth. And we've got something else here, an extra variable, a loop current, which is a stream of warm waters coming in from the Caribbean, and that's just continuously replenishing the warm water feed, the fuel source for Ida. Favorable wind shear and moisture profiles as well. Dry air detrimental to tropical cyclones. If it gets entrained into the circulation, it chokes it off. It doesn't breathe well at that point. Got like no dry air around the system at all, so that's not going to be an issue at all either. And wind shear, there's maybe the possibility of a little bit of wind shear from a sister storm that's in the Pacific, and I'll show you that in a second. And we've also got upper level ridging. This is an area of high pressure, pretty much parked right on top of the Gulf of Mexico. And what this will allow to happen is the ventilation processes of Ida to occur more easily. So with a hurricane, you've got inflow at the surface, air rushing on in, convergence, and then rising motion in the center of the storm, rapidly rising motion, and then it diverges aloft. That high allows the exhaust of the hurricane to spread out more rapidly, allowing it to breathe and suck in more air. So it's much more effective at ventilating the system, and that's what we have in play right now over the Gulf of Mexico. So all factors are go for this thing to continue to intensify. There's a look at the sea surface temperatures. Again, mid-80s, and they only get warmer as they move closer to the coastline. That's why I do expect this to intensify right up until landfall, and we've seen that so many times with tropical systems in the Gulf of Mexico. There's just no lack of warm water, especially this time of the year as we're at the climatological peak of the season, which is for still in the next 3 weeks. And we've got other systems out there actually too that I'm going to show you in a second. So it's not just Ida right now. There's that loop current. First of all, what we're looking at here is the ocean heat content. So we just looked at the sea surface temperatures that has warm water at the skin, like the top 10 meters of the ocean, very, very warm, right? Well, ocean heat content is that heat extending down to a depth. And in some cases, we're talking like 40 meters. worth of depth, and that's a lot of warm water because with hurricanes, tropical systems in general, they're mixing up the ocean, upwelling, and they try to mix up cooler waters from the depths. When you've got nothing but warm water for 40 meters, it's not going to mix up cooler waters below that, especially when it's not stationary. It is moving off to the northwest at a fairly decent clip. So on top of that, you got the loop current that's bringing in the warm waters, and as it upwells, it just has more and more warm water being replenished. And all on its track towards southeast Louisiana, it has that high ocean heat content here. So again, the warm water is not an issue. We have that. The fuel is certainly there. And then there's that upper level ridging pretty much parked right on top of the Gulf of Mexico. And that's going to facilitate that effective ventilation, the exhaust pipe. It's like an engine. It's sucking air in and it's exhausting it aloft, higher up in the atmosphere. So that's what this is going to facilitate there. Now, any limiting factors? Is there any way that this storm cannot be as strong as forecast and something comes into the play here, something comes into the equation that throws it off its course? That's what we would like to see. We'd like to see some wind shear get kicked in. We'd like to see a tongue of dry air get entrained into the system and choke it off. There's not many limiting factors here, unfortunately. So wind shear from the outflow of another hurricane in the Pacific, right on the Pacific coast of Mexico. That's Nora right now. I'm going to show you that in a second. And an ERC. That's an eye wall replacement cycle. When we get tropical storms, tropical cyclones, hurricanes, up into the high category of Cat 3, Cat 4, very intense storms, they develop that eye, and a process unfolds called an eye wall replacement cycle where the eye eventually closes in and collapses on itself, and very briefly that leads to a drop in intensity. Briefly, because as that eye collapses in on itself, a larger eye, stronger eye emerges on the outside, and then that leads to a period of more intensification. So if you can catch that eye wall replacement cycle maybe right at landfall, it would decrease the intensity very, very briefly in time to help us out on the coastline. Will that happen? It's so hard to predict when those occur, but it's a possibility, although that possibility is quite low. All right, here's that outflow I'm talking about with the wind shear from a neighboring hurricane. This is Nora here, also a Category 1. In fact, it might be a little bit stronger now. I haven't checked the latest update on that system. But it's moving along the Pacific coast of Mexico. It's in pretty close proximity to where Ida is. Now, we're not talking about Fujiwara or anything like that. They're not going to interact. But with the outflow aloft, remember how I told you the storms ventilate? They're sucking in air at the surface, inflow, outflow aloft. Same with Nora. It's got the outflow aloft, and some of that could inflict some wind shear, we hope, on Ida here. I think that that would be more the case if this was more of a track to the west, so I'm not very confident that that would happen with that, but it is a possibility, certainly if Nora gets even stronger. All right, let's talk about the winds now. Hurricane wind categories as we go forward, when you can expect the winds to arrive along the coast of the Gulf Coast of the United States. So here we are tomorrow morning, before the sun comes up at 4:30. We've got the outermost bands of the tropical storm force winds now making their way on shore. By the time we get to Sunday afternoon, 1 p.m., you see the yellows here indicating Category 1 winds, the orange here, Category 2. So now we're talking anywhere from 74-mile-an-hour winds up to 110, sustained. We could still have gusts well over that. So damaging winds moving onshore. And this is an onshore wind, so that's piling up the water, and storm surge is going to be a real big problem here. Still, by the time we get to Sunday evening, 6 p.m., large swath of Category 1 winds that could be up as high as 95 miles per hour, even as it makes landfall. So we're talking about Mandeville, Houma, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Franklin getting Category 1 wind gusts. And see what happens here after it moves over land. It starts to drop its wind speeds. The pressures start to rise because it's away from its fuel source, the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, and the frictional component of the winds interacting with the land masses and the orography, the topography there would slow it down. When you're over the open waters, there's very little friction, so these winds are whipping around, and they get very, very strong. Going forward to Monday morning, still have tropical storm force winds extending all the way up into central Mississippi, even into portions of Arkansas, possibly north of Jackson in Mississippi. Now, I really want to drive home the storm surge forecast because half of all hurricane-related deaths happen because of storm surge. Now, this isn't your run-of-the-mill heavy rain downpour, you flood your streets. This is wind-driven sea level rise. This is onshore winds for a long duration of time piling the water onto low-lying areas. Storm surge forecast in these areas in red here in southern Louisiana, a lot of marshy swamplands here, but could get over 11 feet. In fact, the forecast from the Hurricane Center is 10 to 15 feet. That's a story and a half of building coming towards you with water heights. Unbelievable here, and it could be even higher than that in some of these other areas in between. Now, the white areas here are the hurricane protection projects. And that was the levee system put in after Katrina. So not expecting any storm surge in these areas. Hopefully the levees work and the pumps are all up and running. So the storm surge, you're going to find all of that, the strongest of the winds, all on the dirty side of the storm, anywhere to the east of the storm center, particularly the front right or the northeast quadrant. It's really dependent on its track. If it is moving due north, yeah, it's the northeast quadrant, but it's the front right that has the strongest winds and the surge. Now, you factor in the winds, say 100 miles per hour, and then you've got the forward movement of the system. Right now it's 15 miles per hour, so you're looking at 115 mile per hour winds, and all of that's driving towards the direction of the storm movement, and that's pushing it on shore. So that's why that northeast front right quadrant is so bad, and we call it the dirty side of the storm surge and the winds. Here's how storm surge actually works. Again, it's the driving force of the wind piling that water up, and if it's for a long duration of time, it could certainly pile up over 10 feet and even 10 to 15 feet like is projected here. I did mention we've got other storms out there. This is a tropical depression. Number 10, I just want to show you the storm track here because it's not going to affect anybody. It may get a name later today, and that name would be Julian, but it's not lasting long. It'll fall apart pretty much over the next couple days and be a fish storm and not impact anybody. There's two other options out there. There's another tropical wave here to the north of where Julian could possibly be. This has got a high chance, either today or tomorrow or the next day, of becoming a named storm. That would be Kate. And then another wave coming off the coast of Africa, which this time of the year, this area here is called the main development region, and this is hot in terms of climatology, like very active. So any waves coming off the coast there hitting this area have a greater likelihood of developing. And you can see here, it just came off the coast, and it's already got a 60% chance of developing in the next 5 days. That name, potentially, could be Larry. So we've got 3 more names on here that we could have within the next 7 days on top of Ida that hasn't even maxed out yet. All right, that's the latest for you. Again, Category 2 Hurricane Ida likely going to strengthen a lot more throughout the rest of the day today before landfall tomorrow afternoon along the southeastern Louisiana coastline. If you have any questions between now and the next update from the Hurricane Center, you can find me on social media anytime. Our whole weather team is tracking this for you on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook. We'll see you later.